Hi everyone, Bruno here. Welcome to my channel on This and That. I have decided to do a follow-up video to my Russia-Ukraine video, which I posted about a month ago. I came across an interesting article in early March by a Croatian analyst, Marijan Jovic, so I decided to translate it and present it here, as I believe it's interesting and has some good points. After the article, I will provide some of my own comments. So, let's get right into it. But if you'd like to skip right onto my commentary, please feel free to do so. I have the timestamps below. Some of my commentary that I provide here are a good follow-up to my initial video past month. The title of the article is Who in War Financially Benefits and Who in War Financially Loses? War is the worst thing that can hit a nation of a country, especially when a country has a much weaker army from the aggressor, as is the case with Ukraine against Russia. Once close nations and citizens of the same country are in a bloody conflict for which there is no end in sight, the causes, unfortunately, are to be found in people's nature, who opt for war in the case of unresolvable disagreements. Russia is no doubt the aggressor and has direct responsibility for the war, which it started with the assessment it will certainly win. However, the acts of the Ukrainian ruling politicians in the past years, due to their own short-sightedness and stubbornness, contributed to the great suffering of the Ukrainian people. Instead of actively avoiding a confrontation with Russia and achieving a deal with the Russians in Ukraine, they chose exclusively a path of demonizing Russians and forcing Ukraine's membership to the NATO pact. They even mentioned a return to nuclear arms and building up of army units on the east of the country. It was clear that there was going to be no NATO intervention and that a Russian invasion was imminent and millions of Ukrainians will flood Europe. With time, a proud and cultured people from heroes will become despised second-class citizens. Alongside Germany and France, who shamelessly refused to interfere, I'm just going to pause here and give my own commentary. This comment on Germany and France not interfering was maybe the case back in early March when there was no help from these countries, but this isn't the case now. For example, the sinking of the Russian warship Moscow, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, would not have been possible without the West's logistical help. Okay, just back to the article now. The greatest credit for the Ukraine tragedy is the USA, which supported and provoked the distancing of Ukraine from Russia and pushed Ukraine into this conflict, and probably promised all sorts of help. They are slightly supporting in providing arms and in moral support, but forgetting that they themselves, the USA, wiped out a few countries and are responsible for the deaths of millions in the past 30 years. So with this help, they will just prolong the conflict, adding on thousands of more deaths of Ukrainians and Russians, while they could insist on the option of a diplomatic resolution. Instead, they are demonizing the Russians as a people, which is making a peaceful solution less likely. There is no end to the cynicism of the West. If they were to judge all the aggressions like the Russian one, the world would be a better place. On the contrary, they provoked the conflict by way of aggressive politics and undermining Russia since the day the Iron Curtain was lifted. For the US and UK, this war is actually a gift, as it brings them back to the leader's seat, which includes dominance over the EU. Just with supplying arms, the US will end up selling trillions of dollars worth. The economic consequences will not impact each country equally, but it will be felt across the globe and will depend on the situation on the battlefield, and also by the reaction of other numerous countries in terms of who they will side with, either Russia or the West. The key country from which we await a definite reaction is China, and its siding with Russia could be an entry to a change of leadership on the world stage and the start of a world conflict. The West is in decline, its people are used to leisure, social values are degraded, production and innovation are lagging, technocracy has diminished democracy, and it's becoming evident that internal conflicts is the rule when it comes to wealth, race, political preference, etc. Financial war. Russia has been subject to a number of economic sanctions, of which the harshest is removing their banks from the SWIFT platform, which prevents them from simple international settlements when purchasing or selling products, and the freezing of their central bank reserves. Given the fact that Europe still needs Russian oil, their issue now is how to pay for these, with Russia being able to demand payment of these via their own system in rubles, or Chinese yuan, or even gold. Removing Russia from the SWIFT platform could hurt the West and their currencies more than Russia. Russian banks are ceasing their activities in the EU. We witnessed in Croatia where the HPB, just a point here that this is a Croatian state-owned bank. So we witnessed in Croatia where the HPB purchased the Russian bank Sberbank, which in principle is a good thing, even though we do not know all the details of the transaction. For example, was the balance sheet fair? Was cash transferred to Russia prior to the sale? And similar. European banks have ceased operations in Russia, which some, such as Societe Generale and Unicredit, have large exposure, which are up to 4 times their assets. It is expected that all the banks from the EU will lose up to 120 billion euros in Russia, with the total damage to the economy surpassing 500 billion euros. Most Western companies are exiting Russia, which has prompted the Kremlin to quickly introduce a new law on bankruptcy. According to this new law, the assets of every branch of a company, which exists in Russia, moves into the ownership of the Russian state. The estimates are in the billions. It looks like both sides are seizing each other's assets, which is common practice during wartime. So we could consider this a financial war. Besides, each country that is assisting Ukraine by sending arms is de facto in war with Russia, at the very least a Cold War. It is interesting to see how the purchasing of Russian oil has not ceased, which is understandable as Europe cannot survive without it, which shows the emptiness of threats sent Russia's way. Just to pause here, I believe in the meantime that there has been embargoes introduced on Russian oil from certain EU countries, although we do have the case, even with these sanctions, that some of this oil is being still purchased from Russia, which was the case in Britain. Okay, back to the article. Europe can't cope without Russian or Ukrainian wheat, corn, and oil. Given the price of these has risen significantly due to the war, the less volume being sold will be offset by the increase in price. Also, we need to keep in mind that there are other buyers apart from the EU and the US, such as China and other Asian countries. We cannot say that Russia hasn't been impacted by these sanctions. Their stock exchange has closed. They will soon start to feel the shortages and similar. However, Russia is a country that was in a distinctly stable financial position prior to the war, with no debt issues, large foreign currency and gold reserves, and with self-sufficiency in key products. If the war ends soon and we return to normality, the sanctions won't cause much damage to Russia. It will cause damage to the EU, which stock exchange value and currency has lost significantly since the start of the war. The USA is currently an economic winner in this case. They have had their exports of LNG open. Russia, with its aggression, saved the US from collapsing with its bankrupt financial system and its dollar losing the position as the world reserve currency. This war has given the US the opportunity and excuse to continue printing money with nothing to back it, with the aim of financing their political projects across the world and saving their own economy. And it allows the USA for some more time to play the role of the world leader. Russia, on the other hand, will not be able to wage war on its own and be cut off from many of the world's largest countries. And that brings us back to China, which plans are crucial. A China-Russia alliance would drag along a number of other countries and would set up new trade alliances, and the world would yet again be split into 2 blocks, which would be in constant conflict. That scary scenario would create a world unknown to us, with democracy and healthy capitalism in the West being in the memories of the older generation. If we bring our focus back to the current situation, the inflation we are experiencing in the past year is insignificant with the inflation that is yet to come if the war continues. Just in the past week, the price of basic products skyrocketed, oil went up 25%, coal 75%, and gas 100%, steel 15%, and wheat 30%. I think I'll end the article here, as the article goes on to discuss Croatia-specific issues, which are not relevant to the wider public. So I'll end the article here and just add on some of my own commentary. It is evident now that Russia has not succeeded in their Blitz operation in taking over Ukraine, and it is taking much longer than they expected, with many casualties. But when you think about it, there is no good explanation why Russia lost Ukraine in the first place. How could the Kremlin let a country split evenly between pro-Russia and pro-West, and now suddenly, almost overnight, be turned into a hostile, armed-to-the-teeth enemy on the border? Even before this war, the situation that had developed in Ukraine following the Maidan coup of 2014 can only be considered as a complete and massive failure of Russian foreign policy. In the past multiple polls in Ukraine, it showed a majority favorable opinion of Russians and a shared sentiment of belonging to the same civilization. We will have to see how many Ukrainians move to a more anti-Russian position as a result of a protracted conflict on their territory. As for the Ukrainian foreign policy, it is best to quote Lee Smith, quote, "By tying itself to an American administration that had shown itself to be reckless and dangerous, the Ukrainians made a geopolitical blunder that statesmen will study for years to come. A buffer state had sacked its future on a distant power that had simply seen it as an instrument to annoy its powerful neighbor, with no attachment to any larger strategic concept that it was willing to support." Close quote. I think this comment from Lee Smith best describes Ukraine's errors and mistakes that it has made. Okay, so that's it for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, all the best, and talk soon.